Good morning. We're going to start now. Today we continue the public hearing in committee of the whole to consider the bills. Excuse me. Sorry, let me roll it back a little bit. This is the public hearing of the committee of the whole regarding bills number 170, 195, 170, 196, 170, 197, and resolution number 170, 213. Mr. Stitt, please read the titles of the bills and resolution.
Bill number 170195, an ordinance to adopt a capital program for the 6 fiscal years 2018 through 2023 inclusive. Bill number 170196, an ordinance to adopt a fiscal 2018 capital budget. Bill number 170197, an ordinance adopting the operating budget for fiscal year 2018. Resolution number 170213, resolution providing for the approval by the Council of the City of Philadelphia of a revised 5-year financial plan for the City of Philadelphia, covering fiscal years 2018 through 2022, and incorporating proposed changes with respect to fiscal year 2017, which is to be submitted by the Mayor to the Pennsylvania Intergovernmental Cooperation Authority, the authority pursuant to the Intergovernmental Cooperation Agreement, authorized by ordinance of this Council, approved by the Mayor on January 3, 1992, Bill number 1563-A, by and between the City and the authority.
Thank you, Mr. Stitt. Today we continue the public hearing of the committee of the whole to consider the bills read by the clerk that constitute proposed operating and capital spending measures for fiscal 2018, a capital program, and a forward-looking capital plan for fiscal 2018 through fiscal 2023. Today we will hear testimony from the following departments: License Inspection, SEPTA, Community College, and Commerce and OEO. Mr. Stitt, the first person to testify from the administration is
Commissioner Perry.
Good morning.
Good morning, President Clark and members of City Council. I am David Perry, Commissioner of the Department of Licenses and Inspections. Joining me today are Kurt McLaren, our Administrative Services Director, and Rebecca Swanson, Director of Planning and Analysis. We have already submitted our formal written testimony, so I'm going to take just a few minutes to talk about where we are in the direction that the department is heading. With this budget, we continue our commitment to public safety by retooling and rebuilding the department through the following 4 principles. Number 1, use of state-of-the-art technology, which is demonstrated through our completion of the second of 4 phases of the Project Eclipse and our continued use of aerial and street-level imagery to manage unsafe structures in the city. Every license that a business now needs can be obtained online. Close to 50% of all our license transactions are now processed online, with a long-term goal of 90%. Principle 2, by recruiting a diverse, well-trained, and well-qualified professional staff. We are proud of the fact that we are the largest city in the country with an accredited building department. So take that, New York City. 3, a focus on customer service by hiring more plan review and support staff in the Municipal Services Building Concourse and establishing 2 new district offices in areas of the city with the greatest permit activity. We look forward to implementation of an online queuing system this summer, which will enable customers to set up appointments in advance. 4th is effective code enforcement through better coordination with the law department, increase use of administrative hearings, and by increasing the number and scope of programmatic inspections. Effective code enforcement will enable us to evolve from historically being a reactive, complaint-driven department to one that is proactive and progressive. Building construction continues to boom in Philadelphia. Looking at our 3rd quarter numbers, the number of construction permits are up 8.4% from 3rd quarter fiscal 2016, and up 24% from 3rd quarter fiscal 2015. The future is bright for the city, and the staff of the department is excited to play a vital role to ensure safety within the built environment. Thank you for the opportunity to present our budget. My staff and I are available to answer questions at this time.
Thank you, Commissioner. And just got a couple of questions. Sheet here. In your budget detail on section 51, page 5, For your FY17, your department had budgeted positions, but only 333 filled as of December 2016. This amounts to 84 vacancies. The FY18 budget proposes adding 12 additional budgeted positions. Can you tell me how many vacancies exist today and if there's any difficulties in hiring? I mean, is there a reason why we're having challenges in filling those positions?
Yes, that's a good question, Council President. Our current run shows 348 filled positions, which leaves us with 69 vacancies.
69, okay.
In filling these vacancies and in trying to also retool the department has proven to be a challenge because we're looking to rewrite job specs, increase the salary, increase the qualifications for inspectors at the same time of hiring folks. But looking at our hiring plan going forward, we are projecting to hire 9 folks in June, 24 in July, an additional 5 in August, and 25 in September. So by the end of the first quarter in the upcoming fiscal year, we hope to have an additional 63 employees on board with the department. So even though we're currently on the low side of our hiring plan, we have the building blocks in place to greatly increase the number of employees in the department over the next several months.
Okay. This is in somewhat broad range in terms of the qualifications for these positions. I know you have probably a number of different categories, but can you tell me, and the reason I'm asking that question, because I know we had talked over the years about the Philadelphia School District being somewhat of a feeder system, utilizing some of our schools that focus on technical and somewhat construction-related activities. Are the qualifications such that a young person coming out of the CTE program in a particular field and some post-educational training be in a position to fill those positions? That's the big thing now. We're trying to figure out the way to give these young people a path towards a career.
Good morning, Council President Clark. Kirk McLaren, Administrative Services Director. The building inspector job specification currently requires 6 years of experience, and that is generally a pool that we recruit from, obviously from a variety of different trades. Right now, it doesn't. It does not have a provision which would allow entrance just from a vocationary school, but it's something that the department is looking to possibly establish in terms of a apprentice type position that we've been looking at.
So if you're talking about 6 years experience, then that would obviously be in the private sector. How do you get into the private sector to get the 6 years experience? I mean, that's the experience thing is,
Right.
It's important, but if you never get an opportunity to get in the door, it's difficult to get experience.
That is true.
So what's the criteria for that person to get in the private sector or wherever it is they have to get that 6 years experience?
Well, it's any type of trades experience. They do. It would be in the private sector, and that has been a barrier that we've seen, particularly with recruiting diverse and younger candidates. So we're looking to establish possibly, like I said, an apprenticeship type position where it's a lower level civil service position, which would allow one to qualify just with either a vocationary high school degree or equivalent level of experience, and then certainly if folks serve in that position for a few years, we're looking to possibly write that into the job spec that would qualify one to get into the building inspector spec, so we kind of can address that barrier of, you need the experience, and we're kind of always drawing from the same pool, and that's what we want to get away from. So those are some of the ideas that we're looking at.
Okay, so you used the word looking to several times in your responses. So does that mean that there's actual a,
Sure. Sure.
yeah, I was having a difficult time hearing him too, right? Yeah. All right. Does that mean that you actually have a structured program in place, or does that mean you're just looking to, as you referenced, I mean, how far along is this process? Because we've been talking about this for a while.
We don't have it in place. These are preliminary plans that we still need to solidify.
Who are you talking to about that? Or is that an internal process?
Internal, the HR&T group and OHR.
Who? I'm sorry.
Office of Human Resources.
All right, so I really need to get a little better handle on exactly what it is you're doing and what it is you plan on doing, and have some structure. Because if we can be supportive, I know we're looking at bringing some people into the workforce from these programs and rebuild. Councilwoman Blackwell just announced a very significant program out in West Philly with the University of Pennsylvania. Again, if the city is not setting the standard for bringing people and giving people opportunities, then we really can't use the bully pulpit to make other people do it. So I really like to see a more aggressive approach to putting something in place. That would be helpful.
Okay.
Yeah, we're on board with that, Council President. If we can possibly work with the VOTEC high schools and then perhaps a program with community college to prepare folks for a career in building inspection, I think it would benefit everyone, because the age of our average building inspector is at the top end of the range. We really need to be bringing in folks that want to have a career as a building inspector, and we can bring them in right out of maybe a 2-year college
That's
program.
fine. I mean, whatever needs to happen, we need to do it like yesterday.
Understood.
Just there's opportunities, and as people age out, one thing about government, at some point, people leave to take advantage of those great pensions that we have, right? And that's going to free up an opportunity, and that's the most opportune time to get people engaged in a real meaningful opportunity for a career. All right, I'm going to pass it on. I'll come back in the second round. Chair recognizes Councilman Don.
Thank you, Council President. Good morning.
Good morning.
I just want to first commend you, Commissioner, and all your staff. I think what I've seen is a very good job at L&I.
Thank you.
One of the, I think you guys are doing, I hear it on the outside also, so that's really a great measurement that people outside of the city think you're doing a good job, because usually they're the first to complain. So congratulations, I think you're doing very well. To follow up on Council President Clark's suggestion, I visited the Randolph School. You might want to call Randolph. They do some great work with continuing education, or the job training, especially in the welding classes, the automobile classes, and construction classes. I think they have 50 kids in a welding class, and when they graduate, they get jobs at PGW and the water department, so that might be a great source, Randolph. The overall question I have for you is there any area of L&I where you need more funds in order to operate more efficiently?
Well, the key area that there's never enough funding for is for demolition of unsafe and imminently dangerous buildings. We currently have a backlog of unsafe buildings of approximately 4,000, and we have a little over 200 imminently dangerous buildings. With the budget we have, we can take down about 550 a year. So if your building is just getting on the unsafe list, it's several years before we will have the funding in place for that building to be demolished.
Are you saying we have 40,000 buildings waiting to be demolished?
No, 4,000, I'm sorry.
Oh, 4,000. Okay,
Correct.
that's better. I was a little concerned there for a
But
minute.
there's 4,000 that are unsafe. Out of that 4,000, there's approximately 200 that are imminently dangerous, meaning we have to take those down immediately. But the 4,000 that are unsafe, we first issue violations to the building owner, attempt to find the building owners, and compel them to do the work themselves to bring the buildings up to a safe level. If they do not comply, the building owner has passed on and there's no one to take responsible care of the building, eventually that building will deteriorate to the point where it will become part of our imminently dangerous list, and then we'd have to demolish it.
And when you demolish a building, what does that cost us per building typically to demolish?
Currently, our average cost of demolition is just under $15,000 a property.
And so if I owned a building that you had to demolish, and you went out there and demolished it, it cost the city $15,000, does that bill get charged to my account on my property, my tax account?
It doesn't get charged to the tax account. The city does put a code enforcement lien against the property on the building owner or on the property.
So in theory, that $15,000 would get paid back to the city when the property transfers?
Yeah, at some point in time, provided that the property is worth something that can pay off all its outstanding liens and debts, that money would come back to the city.
But if we have to go out to a property and actually demolish the property and incur $15,000 of city money, we don't have the right to force that property to be sold at that point?
We have used sheriff sales to compel property owners to to sell their property to someone who can responsibly handle it. The amount of properties, though, that are imminently dangerous that can be handled through a sheriff sale is pretty low.
So, but right now, what you're saying is we invest $15,000 as a city, we demolish the property, it could sit there for another 10 years demolished in a vacant land. We don't take additional action to put that property into the hands of people who can pay their taxes and take care of the property?
Yeah, I'm going to put Rebecca Swanson on to talk a little bit about what we do in terms of getting properties ready for sheriff sale and how successful or unsuccessful we've been.
Good morning, Councilman. So like you said, when a property is demolished, a lien gets placed on the property. If that property comes up for sheriff sale, the goal would be to sell it for enough to cover the taxes and whatever liens and the interest that's being charged on the liens. Unfortunately, a lot of the places where we have to demolish the buildings, the property does not have the value that if it is sold at sheriff sale to pay the back taxes and the lien, the property is never going to be worth enough to cover both of those. So we have been successful in the past with pushing properties that we've demolished and have that lien to sheriff sale, but it's really only effective in areas where there's some market value, where someone will come in, buy the property for more than the total of the liens.
But even if the market value is low, isn't it worth it for us to sell the property, put it into the hands of a responsible tax-paying person who maintains the property and eliminates the blight in the neighborhood, even if it's below the number?
Yes, that's a revenue department decision, and the outside counsel who handle the sheriff sales, they're the ones that take all those factors into consideration when putting a property up for sale. Because, as you know, there are more properties that have delinquent liens than we can handle in a sheriff sale every given month.
So let me go back to another question. If a property comes up for a sheriff sale and you're able to recapture the $15,000 of demolition, does that money go back to your budget or does that sit in the general fund?
General fund.
So really that should go back to your budget because you laid it out so you can do more demolitions down the road.
I can't answer that question, but it does go back into the general fund.
That's where it should. I mean, if you're investing $15,000 of your money and the city's getting that money back, that money should be used for more demolitions to speed up this process.
Yeah, in a perfect world, it would be like a revolving fund that we can continually reuse that same money for the singular purpose of eliminating unsafe buildings and issues that related to those buildings.
Okay, thank you. Thank you for your testimony. Thank you, Council President.
Thank you, Councilman. Chair recognizes Councilwoman Parker.
Thank you, Mr. President, and good morning, Commissioner. Let me just start too by saying a special thank you to you, Commissioner. Every time we've called your office, it's usually always a crisis, right, where we need an answer right now, and you've always been responsive, and I wanted to say thank you to you and the team on the record. But I would be remiss if I did not mention the names of some folks who we bug often, right, because those are the people who actually sort of on the front line, and so there are two Joes, Joe Flanagan and Joe Joe Spinks, along with the Bernice Johnson. And I know we're getting under their skin sometimes, but they are patient, and I needed to say thank you to them on the record.
Well, thank you very much for recognizing those employees.
Sure.
They do a tremendous job.
First, Commissioner, first is a comment that I'm not going to ask you to respond to because we're working on planning a hearing regarding these two issues. And I know from a public health perspective, L&I has developed a rating system for them, and I'm referencing retaining walls along with driveways in the city of Philadelphia. And I know we don't have the solution. Council President Clark, we know we're working on something. I know the administration has some ideas. I know you would love it if the dollars just surfaced today and we can do all of the work in a more perfect world, but that hasn't happened. But I had to note for the record that in the 9th Councilmatic District, retaining walls and driveways are the number. Used to be trees, and trees are still a priority, but right now it's retaining walls and driveways. So it's really for my president too, Mr. President. I just wanted to just affirm that publicly. My first question, Commissioner, is about something that we talked about last year, and that was the enforcement of provisos. The enforcement of provisos. And we had talked about communities, when development take place, the RCOs, you know, they sort of develop a proviso, but sometimes you can develop one and the elements of the proviso are in no way, shape, or form enforceable. Last year during testimony, you mentioned that there were some sort of best practices for provisos so that there could be some sort of standard rubric that can be developed, because you shouldn't put something in a proviso that L&I has to turn around and say, wait, we can't enforce that. So is it possible for us to, and we talked about this last year, work with the zoning board along with planning to see if there's a way that we can develop just a standard rubric for proviso?
Yeah, as simple as the problem sounds, it's actually fairly complex in order to solve it. And we've been having ongoing discussions about how do we effectively enforce zoning provisos and looking at different scenarios. The ones that we can effectively enforce are provisos that are actually included in the language of the zoning permit. Sometimes what the community wants gets buried in a letter and it never comes forward and gets clearly stated on the zoning permit exactly what it is that convinced the zoning board to approve a certain use or a certain structure. So they need to be clearly defined in the actual zoning permit. The ones that are more effective for us to enforce are ones that deal with the physical properties of a property, height, area, number of parking spaces, things of that sort are easily enforced by the department. In some cases, even operating hours, we just were looking at one in which a variance was granted for a swimming club with the proviso that it closed by 12 o'clock on the weekends, and that we can indirectly enforce that. When we get notice that a club such as that one is staying open late, we do have folks that are out there. Tracy Ruffman does a tremendous job on the weekends looking at nightclubs. So if there was a closure hour, we could effectively enforce that proviso. But it all comes down to making sure that what the community wants is manifested in the order of the zoning board and finds its way onto the zoning permit. Because that's the only way for that record to be available to everyone going forward.
I would ask, Commish, and I appreciate everything that you just added on the record, if there is a way that we could develop a fact sheet, and it's just me, some sort of, standard operating procedure of, the recommended rubric for how you develop an effective proviso, something that's standard that we could give to CBOs and RCOs and just residents in the city of Philadelphia with all of the guidance that you just provided to us, because otherwise they're spinning their wheels. So I look forward to working with you in your office, and if zoning and planning could come in to help us with that, that would be a great thing for us to do, and it would benefit the community.
Excellent. We look forward to that collaboration.
Thank you. My next question is in regards to the demolitions, and you started this line of discussion with Councilman Dom. So tell me, do we have some sort of hot spot map that shows where the most demolitions are or need to take place? I think you mentioned 4,000, and you said about 200 of those were eminently dangerous. Can you provide us with a map?
Yeah, absolutely. We can provide each council office with a map showing exactly where eminently dangerous buildings are within your councilmatic district. They are, for the most part, fairly evenly distributed across the city, but we will give every council office a map of the eminently dangerous properties.
Thank you. And Mr. President, if I may, the last question I wanted to get in was in regards to Eclipse. And I know your testimony talked about that business and trade licenses are now fully online in Eclipse, and that permits, electronic plan review, and code enforcement implementations are scheduled for full completion by April 2018. And so what I wanted to just know for the record, does this mean that Eclipse will be up and running and fully functional by April 2018, or are there sort of other implementation, phases that also need to occur?
Yeah, there's additional phases beyond the permit phase, which is the one that we're in now. There's code enforcement, which will then extend beyond the upcoming fiscal year into the following fiscal year. But the key one, the one that everyone's been waiting for, is the phase dealing with online permitting and electronic plan review. That will revolutionize how we do business in the city of Philadelphia in terms of development.
And that's fully
next
available
up.
now.
The permit piece is in development right now. It's licenses. Licenses are now completed. So any business that needs a license to get started or needs to renew a license, they can use Eclipse and do their entire transaction online. And like I said, we're closing in on 50% of all these license transactions are now being done online. So we have that under control. We're now moving into the permit area and doing the development piece for permitting.
Okay. Thank you, Mr. President.
Thank you, Councilwoman. Chair recognizes Councilwoman Bass.
Thank you, Mr. President.
You're welcome.
Good morning. How are you?
Good morning.
Good, good. I just wanted to say a couple of things and ask a couple of questions. And first, I wanted to thank you, Commissioner. It's really just been a joy working with you and with your team. Rebecca, the entire office. I see Karen Gus back there, who we go way back to our Allison Schwartz days. And so I just wanted to really thank you so much for just being so accessible, your entire staff. It's really just a joy to work with you. And that hasn't always been said about L&I, I think, from members of council.
Well, thank you for your comments, Councilwoman.
Absolutely.
We appreciate it.
I did have a couple of questions for you, and we recently had a conversation about demolitions, and I know Councilman Dom asked about demolitions just a moment ago, and I have a particular concern about demolitions on streets where there are row houses, and so basically you effectively cut out a piece of the block when a demolition occurs. And so I was wondering if you could talk just a little bit about L&I's preventive strategies, what we could do to get in front of that, because we would like to see as much as possible that we not have sort of like that missing tooth on a block. It really does change the character of the entire neighborhood. And so where we could save a property, I think, we all agree that that's what we'd like to do. So I was just wondering if you could talk a little bit about that.
Sure, and you're absolutely correct. The last thing that we want to do is do a demolition in the middle of a
Right.
row of properties,
Yeah.
because not only does it upset the rhythm and scale and character of that particular strip, it also weakens the entire row, because you're taking out a key member. It's almost like taking out a portion of a truss. It weakens what's left on that block. So we try to avoid that at all costs. We do not have a lot of tools at our disposal, though, to rehab a property that's in the middle of a block. What we try to do is take actions against the property owner to get the owner to step forward and do what's necessary to stabilize that particular property. In a lot of cases, what you have is significant deterioration of the roof and the roof support system, and that type of work is beyond the capability of the contractors that we currently have available to mitigate unsafe structures. So I would love if we had a pool of money and a strategy to go in and be able to repair certain buildings that are critical nature, but we simply do not have those tools at our disposal at this time.
And recognizing that L&I, like so many other departments, really suffers from a lack of resources. Do you think that even with the lack of resources, that there's something we could do, maybe putting together a strategy that moves a property that is imminently dangerous and on the demolition list? Maybe we could move that sort of like to the front of the line so that, there's a call that goes out, an emergency call, so to speak, that goes out to the district council person and also to the appropriate agencies within L&I, and that, maybe it will require a near immediate conversation, sit down, whatever, to talk about what are the options for a particular property. Maybe that's something that we might be able to work on and develop. I don't know what your thoughts are.
Yeah, I mean, that has some potential, especially if there's developers out there interested in perhaps taking on a distressed property. And we need to look at it in a real holistic fashion.
Right.
And we can't be we're not going to demolish our way to a better city.
Exactly.
We need to use these other strategies, and I agree with you. We need a more comprehensive plan for dealing with distressed properties to get them into a situation where they can be put back to good use. What ends up taking up 99% of our energy, time, and budget is just dealing with the properties that are literally can collapse at any moment. I mean, our first concern, our first mission is to protect public safety.
Of
so
course.
those 200 properties are imminently dangerous. They take all our resources from us, and rightfully so, because we can't start talking about what do we want to do, what can we do, what's a better way of handling unsafe buildings while we have an overhang of imminently dangerous buildings that command our immediate attention.
And we certainly agree. We don't want anyone to be, in a dangerous position, trying to save a property. We want to make sure that we take care of people first. But where there's an opportunity, we look forward to working with you on that to save some of these properties when there is an opportunity present. The other thing I just wanted to mention briefly is I wanted to, number one, thank you for your work on the nuisance business bill, which is currently the law that's been rolled out in the northwest section of Philadelphia and the 35th, 39th, and 14th police districts, and is also now working its way throughout the city of Philadelphia. I know also working its way into northeast Philadelphia. And I wanted to thank you because you yourself were present and helped to craft this bill so that we're not putting businesses out of business. We want our businesses, we need our tax revenue, but at the same time, we need businesses to operate in a way that's responsible to the communities in which they serve. And so you were at the table on that, and I really wanted to thank you for just being so accessible and involved in that very important piece of legislation. And last but not least, I wanted to also thank you for the work that we did on stop and goes. We've done, a significant amount of work. There's still a lot more to be done, but we went out last fall along with the fire commissioner, the police department, and the health department to tour a number of stop and goes in our neighborhoods that are really operating, they're probably some of the worst of the worst. And so I wanted to thank you for, again, being accessible and being a part of that and seeing exactly what was happening in our neighborhood. So many thanks to you and all of the folks over at L&I. Thank you, Mr. President.
Thank you, Councilwoman.
Thank you,
We
Council
appreciate
Lady. Chair recognizes Councilwoman Keona Sanchez.
Good morning,
I also want to thank you and recognize the mayor for his continuous support to the Building Oversight Committee. I think his commitment to looking at the department and having our external stakeholders be at the table as some of the reforms happen and the rollout of Eclipse speaks to our wanting to do good business and help our businesses do good businesses. I think that's a good sign. Sometimes folks don't like folks looking over people's shoulder. I think you've embraced that, and I think the results are starting to bear fruit with that. So I appreciate that. And I appreciate the fact that the mayor kept me on that to continue to work with the department. Wanted to talk a little bit around nuisance properties, some of the issues around some of the recovery and the rooming houses, and ask you, what do you think are some of the tools that may be missing in our toolbox to deal with some of these in some of the neighborhoods? I know that in the past we had a task force. We did a lot of work around recovery houses and rooming houses. What have you been able to see is still missing in our toolbox to kind of narrow in on some of these properties?
Yeah, and I'm going to ask Rebecca in a minute to give you the statistics on it. But we've been taking a hard look at these recovery houses, and what we find to be extremely frustrating is we have one operator out there will close down one of the properties that they're operating, and next thing you know, those same people that were living in the first property show up somewhere else. And then we find out about it and we shut down a second place. And then they go move to a third place. So there's a couple things we need to do, or I would like to see happen. Number one, we need to work on an equity action and taking that owner to court and getting a court order directly against the actions of that particular moldable property owner. Playing this whack-a-mole game and trying to guess where these victims are going to show up next is not a good use of our resources. It certainly is not respectful of the people under their care and is putting people in dangerous situations. Secondly, I'd like to look at, revisit the issue of how some of our cease operations are enforced. Back years ago, if there was a violation of a cease operations order, there would actually be an arrest of anyone that violated the cease operations order. Over time, that's been downgraded to just issuing a ticket. So if you can imagine, you have someone operating hundreds of units around the city, just getting a summary ticket is just the cost of doing business. We need stronger tools. We can't allow people to get away with just a slap on the wrist when basically they're involved in, and I don't think this is going too far, they're really involved in human trafficking.
Thank you. I appreciate that. And then I know this is something we've brought up to the police department because they did have a unit in the past that worked closer with L&I around some of these quality of life enforcement issues. I think we may need to revisit that because it does give it more authority when your inspectors can show up, with police and say you are violating the law.
Correct.
So I look forward to continuing that conversation. Maybe we can look at some things at the East Division to do some of that piloting. Going back to what Councilwoman Bass was talking about, the public nuisance, and your team has been wonderful in rolling out her law. And we have a pilot in Frankfurt that has been pretty productive along the Frankfurt corridor around this nuisance. Speak to us around, I know there have been conversations with the state. What is it that you'd like to see the state do better so that we can publicly advocate for it? And then what do you see some challenges with us locally around, particularly state licensed facilities, recovery house or state license, stop and goes or state licenses. What are some of the missing pieces around communication with the state around some of those issues and their inability to monitor their licenses?
Okay, on the issue with the recovery houses, the state needs to be there dealing with the actual program, the level of treatment, the level of care of the individuals. L&I's responsibility there is for the physical structure itself. So when we show up at a recovery house, we're limited to looking at whether there's a fire alarm system, a sprinkler system, the exiting. We have no authority, because we're preempted by the state, over how that actual program is operating. Are they treating the residents of the facility properly? Are they getting the care that they paid for? Those things are outside of our control, and we need the state to step up and take a hard look at the licensing and the enforcement over the operational aspects of these facilities. On the other issue that has been frustrating, and I know it's frustrating to council, it's frustrating to legitimate business owners and the community, has to deal with the stop and goes. We've been told that because liquor is licensed at the state level, we're preempted from applying local controls to make sure that these businesses are operating as legitimate restaurants and other facilities. But what doesn't happen at the state level is they're not enforcing, for instance, there's a requirement in the state liquor code that you have 30 tables and chairs in order to be a restaurant and get a restaurant license. They don't enforce that, and we're preempted from enforcing it ourselves. So we end up with places that have no tables and chairs, yet they have a liquor license, which makes no sense whatsoever. The only thing you can do, you can walk in some of these places and buy a shot of spirits and drink it standing up and then leave. I mean, what's going on out there under the guise of a restaurant, under the guise of being controlled with a state liquor license is just so far removed from what I believe any responsible person had ever envisioned.
I know that task is going to get greater as the state looks to release more liquor establishments throughout the city. This is going to be a growing topic. And just lastly, Council President, because I know we want to move on, I wanted to thank the Commissioner. As you know, Councilman Dom and I and others have been working on this Gurney Street, and the Commissioner has been a really good advocate in our work with Conrail about cleaning up some of this railway, and the work is still to come. It's going to be a long road ahead, but I appreciate the department's willingness to at least sit at the table because of his experience at the Streets Department and L&I, and ensuring that we're going to have a safer place in that area. So thank you, Mr. President.
Thank you, Councilwoman. Commissioner, real quick, I just want to jump in. So the state prohibits you from doing this by law on the liquor establishment in terms of non-compliance with the bathrooms and tables and all of that, right?
That's correct.
All right. And to your knowledge, what agencies within the state have the jurisdiction or the authority to issue whatever notices they do on the state level to deal with that? Is it just Liquor Control Board, or is it the Attorney General's office? Is it some other entity? State police?
My understanding is that it's the rules that are applied and the effort that's applied by the Liquor Control Board and the LCE, or the agencies that should be in these establishments enforcing all the rules that are required to get a liquor license, but they don't regularly enforce all the rules in Philadelphia.
Do they have so the Liquor Control Board, do they use the state police as agents?
Yes, they do.
All right. Can they use any other law enforcement state entity for enforcement?
Yeah, I'm going to have to pass on that question because it's getting beyond my understanding of the powers of the state and how much and how they delegate that power to their various enforcement branches.
All right. Can you check with law or whomever you need? I just need to know, if it's not the state police, can the Attorney General's law enforcement arm, because they're used for a number of things, gun violence, illegal weapons and all of that. I just need to know because apparently the state police have not been responsive to the level that most of us would have liked, and I'd like to find out who else has the authority. And last but not least, because you know I'm the kind of cowboy, if we in fact enforce the law, what's the worst case scenario? we get sued by the state?
Yeah, I mean, there's been other...
They've already preempted us. I mean, okay, so what are they going to do, preempt us again?
Yeah, and that's basically what would happen. I mean, locally, we had some rules for sale of malt liquor, and the city was sued, and that provision of the code was declared null and void. There was also a malt liquor board for a period of time. The city was sued, and that became null and void. So the city is basically left with no enforcement tools.
All right, so you know where I'm going with this. I'm going to try and see. You got to get in court with some of this stuff. Some of these preemptions are totally ridiculous. And the fact that we can't enforce laws on our books because the state preempts us, but yet are unwilling to enforce those same laws is ridiculous. And I don't know what we have to lose. If we're already preempted, then I think we need to force the issue. But
Yeah, we are equally
that's out of my pay
frustrated.
grade, but I understand it. I'm going to push it though. All right.
Excellent.
Thanks, Commissioner. Chair recognizes Councilman Heenan.
Thank you, Council President, and good morning, and thank you for your testimony, Commissioner. Proud to have you, leading the charge and changing some reforms in the department. So,
Thank you.
It's been a pleasure to work with you and your entire team from top to bottom, so thank you for that. A couple of questions to follow up on your testimony and some, general questions just as follow-up to see where we are with certain subject matters. One, there was a conversation about either, how do the eligibility for inspectors, having the 6 year of actual experience. I wouldn't change that. All right, I think, I may be a little on the outside there, but I think we need to really tread slowly and very carefully when it comes to how we train and who we, not who we train, it's how we train to make sure that we have the best inspectors and with the best experience in the city as we have. I mean, we are operating off of 2009 codes. We were just talking about preemption, with the LCB and the liquor enforcement. I mean, we're far behind on what we can inspect and what we have the authority to inspect here in the city. With all this construction boom, we're trying to create job opportunities, and we should continue to create job opportunities. I think that it's very complicated and it's very dangerous, all right, not to have experienced inspectors. How they get that experience, I think we'll have to try. You'll figure out. I'm sure how we and where we draw our workforce. I think is important. We should be using Philadelphia kids and Philadelphia citizens to get that kind of training. But we had a committee appointed by a council president for a special committee on demolition with recommendations, like almost 100 recommendations. We allocated a lot of resources for a demolition team, all right, that's under your purview. And we continue to try to do the best we can to cross training, with our departments or, with our inspections. So take your time, all right? It's just take your time, make sure we get it safe. Which leads me into a question. We passed a law as a part of the recommendation of demolition, special demolition committee, I think in concert with the administration, on OSHA training, all right, for workers on the work site. How is that going? All right, has that been put in place? Those, that policy, and are we checking on construction sites for OSHA training?
Yeah, where we're at is that as part of our licensing of construction contractors, we required a submittal of the OSHA 30 certificate, or else they will not get a license or will not get a renewal. So we put that piece in place. We also worked and put together, we had OSHA come in and had OSHA 10 training available to anyone that wanted to take it. We had it available in both English and Spanish, and we had a good turnout for both classes. We, on occasion, will go to a job site and check for OSHA 10 credentials. We're not at the point yet where we have a full audit program in place to randomly pick construction projects and do a full top-to-bottom audit, but that is in our to-do list to have that done. We would like to be able to say that in any given year, we've randomly checked a certain percentage of construction projects. We're not quite there yet.
Well, we can get there, I'm sure. You know, we can work towards that, so keep pushing forward on that. The certification stating that the employees or licensed contractors performing the work on the construction site, is that a legal document attesting that they themselves or some, you know, the workers on the site have OSHA 10 training?
Yeah, I mean, it's a local law that all workers have to have OSHA 10 training.
Right.
So,
But my question is, sorry, so we don't have the ability to get there yet, and I understand it's going to take some time to ramp up to randomly check workers on sites, but when you get a permit or when you apply for a license or you have a renewal and they have that certification that you mentioned.
the OSHA 30
the
for the
OSHA
contractor.
For the contractor. Is there anything in there that says that the employees on the site will have OSHA 10? Well, it's a suggestion.
Okay.
It's just a suggestion, and it'd be nice that it be binding, you know, like a legal document attesting that the employees or licensed contractors on, you know, to perform in the work have OSHA 10. I mean, it's the only way until we get a system, until we work our way until Eclipse is up fully running, and, you know, we have the right, you know, the correct amount of inspectors, you know, because, you know, I can't imagine the workload that the inspectors have. I mean, they're really doing a good job, especially with all the traffic going on in the city and construction. It really, I'm sure, makes it a little more challenging. So I'm just suggesting that, you know, possibly, you know, take a look at that internally from an admin standpoint where, you know, they would attest that, you know, the employees, because there's only two types of employees or two types of workers on a construction site by law: a licensed contractor or an employee of a licensed contractor. Is that correct?
That's correct, Councilman.
That's great. So, that was all I wanted to, you know, state on that one. And when it comes to, you know, recognizing what types of workers, trained workers that are on construction sites, has the department, you still do random audits for the permits that are being pulled? You know, just to, you know, randomly check for third-party permit holders. So if somebody is a sole contractor and they're pulling, or a sole proprietor contractor, and they're pulling, you know, 30 or 10 or 15 permits, we would want to, you know, check and audit, making sure that they have licensed contractors working for them or employees that are working for them, and they indeed won't be a sole proprietor.
Yeah, that's correct. At this point, we're looking at the most egregious circumstances and investigating certain contractors that have what appear to be a huge number of permits and not enough evidence that they have employees to support that level of activity. And when we reach a conclusion, we then bring those contractors in for an administrative hearing. But we don't have, we're not set up at this point to really go to a deep level with checking a wide range of folks out there. There's a few that come to our attention that have a significant number of permits, and then we're looking at those in particular.
So do you, and
Yeah,
I'll
Councilman.
go to the second round, do you have in your database, do you know who's the sole proprietor, contractor?
Yes, we do.
Okay, I mean, just, maybe you can match that up with the amount of permits, and that'll be a good start.
Okay, good idea.
Right, and I'll have some follow-up questions on the second round. Thank you.
Thank you, Councilman. Chair recognizes Councilman O.
Thank you very much, Council President. Good morning. I have just three questions. I'll try to get through them. I read that you're working with OIT to improve, well, the city's technology and your function there. But could I ask you about do you have some type of technology to deal with L&I problems that occur from technology, social media, more pop-up type events? So I get complaints about pop-up strip clubs, pop-up, all kinds of things. Pop-up parties in neighborhoods and warehouses, they're distributing beer. And so when neighbors call, do they have some way to call and have some kind of quick response? Is that something that L&I can do, or is that not something you could do? Is there something on the horizon for that?
Yeah, we monitor to a certain degree social media, looking exactly for the things that you're talking about. Things such as nightclub type occupancies in warehouses. The standard way for folks to that would find these things would be to file a 311 complaint. We are strengthening our ties with 311 to make sure that the complaints are adequately described and that we can do a better job in responding to those complaints. But that's our means for getting most of our information from the public so that we can deploy the appropriate inspectors.
Okay, I don't need a response. I'm just going to say that when I go to community meetings, a lot of civics around the city, certain communities in certain sections of our city seem to have a big problem with the fact that they typically will call the police. They're trying to call people, but by the time someone comes out, if they come out, a lot of times the police are not exactly sure, is this a rental, is it a business, you have a license, a permit? And so these type of pop-up events that are unpermitted, selling alcohol, doing other kinds of things, neighbors call, and I guess they're looking for some way to get a quick response team out there of some sort. I'll just move on to my second question. I get the sense that you're working on this. Is that correct?
That is correct. We do have a nuisance task force that's out there. They're out to the early hours of the morning on the weekends, and if a call came in through 911 of an illegal party going on, they would be available to do that inspection, and they have in the past.
Okay. The next thing is soda tax. How is that? So the question I get is, I don't know if this is rumor, this is true, or what's going to happen here. A retailer, for example, sells soda. A city inspector comes out to look for receipts. This is the understanding that I'm getting, and I don't know if it's true or not. And so they ask the retailer, show me the receipts for the sodas that you're selling. And the retailer then shows the receipts, and the inspector then says, I want to search your store to see if you're buying sodas from outside of the city. Is that a procedure? Is that a rumor? What's going on with that?
Yeah, L&I would have absolutely no involvement in checking for receipts for where a proprietor was buying their soda. If anyone should ever tell you that an L&I inspector was in there, please let me know, because that would be a significant problem. That's handled by the Revenue Department. It's not handled by licenses and inspections.
To your knowledge, and maybe I'll have to ask Revenue now, is Revenue going to send people to stores and basically try to see how many sodas were bought inside the city and then see if there's any sodas that were bought outside of the city?
Yeah, I have no knowledge of what their program is or how they're going to enforce that.
I got it. Thank you very much. My last question, So a lot of what complaints that I get in Southwest Philly and some other sections of the city, but particularly because I live in Southwest Philly, has to do with dumping. And my question is, it's such a difficult issue to tackle. You know, you wake up the next day and there's a whole bunch of construction debris, environmental, problems, that type of thing. And it happens pretty consistently in certain neighborhoods. And I know that there's a serious fine. It doesn't seem to stop anybody. They come out like 3 o'clock in the morning or 4 o'clock in the morning in poor neighborhoods. But is there a penalty if, for example, someone has a license, a permit, and then they're caught dumping construction debris or whatever they're doing? Is there a process by their permit to do the work is suspended or anything like that? Are you guys involved in that at all?
Yeah, primarily, short dumping it's a criminal activity. Just because it may involve construction materials doesn't necessarily make it an L&I activity. However, when we can pinpoint that to a particular job or a particular contractor, then we're in a position of taking action against that contractor or shutting down that particular job. So there is penalties that we can impose from an L&I perspective, but to really send a message, I would suggest that we need to take a harder look at approaching this from the criminal behavior aspect of short dumping.
All right. Thank you very much. Thank you.
Thank you, Councilman. Chair recognizes Councilman Taubenberger.
Thank you, Mr. President. Commissioner, I really want to thank you and your staff for being very cooperative, and you've heard from my colleagues as well, and now you'll hear from me. It's appreciated that your staff is attentive and right there with answers, and very, very, very helpful. And you personally, with your new innovations and the opportunity to give me a tour of the intake facilities, or how this all works, the processes rather, it's greatly appreciated. I want to thank you, and I want that noted for the record as well.
Thank you, Councilman.
I do have a question as it relates to safety. I mean, safety's been discussed many times. There was a joint task force before I got on the council. But the fact of the matter is, safety means lives, injuries, preventing death. Is there, I guess a question is, construction safety specialists, are how many are employed in L&I, or is that?
You want to answer that question? Sure. I'm going to pass this on to my Administrative Services Director.
Good morning, Councilman.
Good morning.
Right now, we have in our district offices about 45 building inspectors, with another 19 that were just recently hired and are undergoing training for all of their state-required certifications. And in addition to that, we have 17 inspectors in our contractual services unit, which handles all the inspections and coordination of demolitions. And that's not counting our code enforcement inspectors on top of that handle property maintenance.
But those inspectors, would they go out with the eye looking towards safety, or essentially how things are being built? I mean, the quality of the work. I mean, or will it hold up, I guess?
The building inspectors are responsible for ensuring that the properties are, construction is built according to the plans, code and the plans, yes.
And if they see something that would be potential to employees or potential safety risk to the public at large who maybe are walking around, do they have the right to call that to attention as well?
Oh, yes, yes.
And is there a budget in the department for members of the department for taking OSHA classes, whether it be in 10 or in 30, or is that?
There is. We have partnered with the Mid-Atlantic Construction Safety Council for the past couple years for providing OSHA 30 training for all of our building inspectors. And we just recently put out a RFP to continue that training. So all of our building inspectors have had the OSHA 30 construction class. Obviously, our new hires need to still go through that class, and we needed to put the contract out. But we do have funding for that activity.
Is it sufficient for your needs, or would you like?
Yes. Yes, it is.
Mr. Chairman, I thank you very much, and thank you, Commissioner.
Thank you, Council. I appreciate your support and your interest in touring the concourse. That was greatly appreciated by the staff.
Thank you. Thank you very much.
Thank you, Councilman. Councilman Jones.
Thank you, Mr. Chairman. So one of the good things about being in this body is it is a diverse body. We aren't all monolithic. I think we all see things from our lens, and a problem to one may not be a big deal to others. In the 4th District, and first I should do like everybody else, and thank you for not changing your cell phone number and being accessible, because you know I use it. And you've always been responsive. Your staff is responsive. When we have emergencies, you're right on the spot, and we appreciate that. A couple of observations. I've had a tour with the captain of the 19th, and we went up some of our commercial corridors, and I was with State Representative Morgan Cephas, and we talked about certain business establishments that if they aren't a problem, problems seem to find them. Whether criminal activities on the location, whether there are robberies and deaths within 100 feet of the location, and it always seems to be in those spots. And you might say, did the business cause the problem, or is the problem just in the area? I don't know, but we need to take a look at joint task force. So what I seem to find is that LCB comes in and they'll look at a particular problem where they're looking for Jersey bottles, and they may come in for that reason, and their eyes aren't trained to the L&I violations right in front of their face, or the health department violations right in front of their face, and so they ignore them. What we have to do if we're going to be effective to create good neighbors and good businesses is to create a joint task force similar to what we did with demolition, similar to what we do with criminal justice, where everybody's in the same room, speaking a common language. And we're not pointing the finger saying, well, that's the state and this is the city, that's this department, that department. The problem exists, as Councilwoman Bass talked about, and it is prolific in our community, whether it is simply that stores are covering more than 50% of their window space and wonder why people are getting robbed with impunity, or whether it is people selling loosies to minors for $1 or whatever a cigarette, whether it is liquor by the shot sold in our communities at 7 a.m. at 60th and Market. 7 a.m. folks are lining up to anesthetize themselves with liquor. So the person walking to the bus stop at 60 has to look at this, has to deal with this. The person that would love to go into that takeout restaurant is afraid because sometimes the visibility isn't there, and you have some young thundercats in the walkway looking and lurking. Not to say that we're stereotyping anybody, but we have to take the laws that are on the books, whether at the federal, state, or local level, figure out who's responsible for what, and go in together. Not all the time, but some of the time, so that businesses get the idea that, no, I can't go across to Jersey to get liquor sold in Pennsylvania, or I can't go get soda for that matter. Revenue Department, you could put together LCB, the Health Department, the Revenue Department, your L&I, Fire, Weights and Measures, and that would be the Elliott Nest of city government. And you would be able to stay in your lanes, observe what you observe, and hold people accountable for how they operate their business. But if we don't, there is such a loophole that they can navigate all of those departments. Finally, what I would say is everybody knows on the street that all I got to do is begin construction after 5 and you're not going to be there. And we have to not be so predictable. We have to give you a little more money so that you can create a weekend and after hours team. That solves some of the problems that I got from the captain of the 19th, Stanford, who said that some of these stores are operating well beyond the time that they're supposed to. Well beyond the time. And we wonder why somebody winds up shot, robbed, or murdered near that location. So if we held them to a standard that is reasonable, we have inspectors, not you, well, your streets, that go out and check for people's grass, and there was really a conversation about whether or not shoveling snow. Well, there are some priorities in my community and in districts around the city that we really need your help. There are communities that are growing frustrated. On Lansdowne Avenue, it is quicker to get a drink than to get a vegetable or to get a book. And what we need you to do is not to be our enforcers, but you do need to enforce the law. And we can't give them the out of that's somebody else's department, we'll come back. Because what they do is they skirt the law, they provide inferior service to our constituents. And we need that joint task force, we need weekend hours, and we need cross-training among departments. So a fire inspector should be able to write a ticket for L&I problems that may cause a fire. And we have to be smarter, and we have to work better together and chop down some of these silos where we can legally. Thank you, Mr. President. And I want, for the record, when the bell rings for me, I stop.
Thank you, Councilman.
This year.
Adherence to the regs is always a great thing, but and I really appreciate the fact that I appreciate it, sir. You're setting a great example for our colleagues. Thank you. Chair recognizes Councilwoman Gim, and I don't know if he was like implying that anybody.
I don't know why he said that right ahead of me, Council President. I don't know whether that was a notation to the newbies.
I'm sure he wasn't, though.
The rookies are the last one left. Thank you very much, Council President. I really want to thank the Commissioner and your team, especially Rebecca Swanson. I think you've done a wonderful job working with us on the Lead Advisory Task Force and a number of other initiatives. In particular, I was wondering if I could just piggyback a little bit off of what some of, there's just been a number of issues raised. We obviously value your department tremendously and your professionalism even more. But could you talk a little bit about some of the work you're doing that we've been trying to address around some of these evictions and substandard housing and landlords, and especially if you could maybe point to some of the advances you're making around some of the problem landlords and unlicensed rentals that you're seeing across the city?
I'm going to ask Rebecca to make some comments on this. She's been a point person on a lot of our efforts to deal with landlords and the issues that tenants have been having.
Good morning, Councilwoman.
Good morning.
As you know, we participated in a lot of the conversations around landlord-tenant. One of the things that we started this year was in order to renew or obtain a rental license, your property cannot have any open property maintenance code violations. That went into effect in January, so it really hit when licenses were renewed in February. We did find that a good number of people did comply their violations after they were told they were not able to renew. We do have a population of people who were unable to renew. The violation was not corrected. We now have that list, and we are going through that and making a determination of how to reach out to those people and let them know you can't be continuing to rent, and if you need help complying your violation, this is who you contact. As far as identifying unlicensed rentals, we are still in the preliminary stages of conversations of what's the best way to try to find these, and a lot of it's conversations with the utilities. This came up in the landlord-tenant hearings. Those conversations have not progressed, but we are looking forward to partnering with members of council, and some of our state representatives have also expressed interest in moving those conversations forward. And then we're just continuing to partner with the health department on the lead paint. They're bringing their new data warehouse together, and we're going to have those conversations next year when renewals, if they've sent out the notices for people who have not complied with the lead certification requirement.
Thank you very much. And if there's anything that you feel that we specifically can do to work with the utilities, would you let us know about that?
Absolutely.
Okay. And are you aware whether any of these communications about some of your work is going over to the court system at all? Because at the end of the day, the landlord-tenant courts is going to be in front of the judges, and whether they're made aware of unlicensed rentals, whether those things and changes in the department are being communicated over to the court system at all?
I don't know about conversations with landlord-tenant court because the city is not involved in those particular cases, but we have been having conversations with the Fair Housing Commission and with Rue Landau about how better communication between us and their hearings.
Okay, great. And, again, I just really want to thank you for your tremendous work. It wasn't easy being on that large advisory commission and going through complicated questions about what we can and can't do and why we can't do more. So I really appreciate it.
Of course.
I'm just going to switch a little bit. I noticed that, I appreciate the diversity in and amongst your staff, Commissioner Perry. And I know that there's just been a lot of complaints about the stop and goes, and in particular, a number of them have been Chinese owners and other types. Under code enforcement, I noticed that you don't have anybody who speaks Mandarin currently. Is that something that you could take a look at as the city looks to move, towards stronger enforcement so that we can communicate better? I know that there, to me, is some difference between nuisance businesses who are deliberate and purposeful in their violations, and a number of immigrant businesses that struggle to access information from the city. They're not clear about what their options are, what the code enforcements mean, whether they're supposed to, how seriously they're supposed to take them, what kind of consequential path each additional violation leads to. And I'm wondering if there's any possibility about you're looking into a Mandarin speaker for code enforcement, just because it seems like that's become an issue.
Yeah, we are trying hard to diversify the department. We will be hiring soon what we call our L&I code enforcement inspectors as part of our operations district. We have 20 employees that we will be interviewing and hiring. What we can do is try what they call selective certification, that if there's any folks that are on that list that speak specific languages, we can have them interviewed first and be brought to the top of the list. If you can give us recommendations on what would be most helpful, we would certainly appreciate that.
Yeah.
Our first piece in trying to get code enforcement is to educate, and we understand that in a lot of cases, folks just simply don't know what the rules are. So coming down hard and trying to shut down businesses, when we can take those folks, educate them to what needs to be done, and have them operate in a code compliant manner, is beneficial for everyone, and that should always be our first choice.
Yeah. Thank you. And we're trying to work with Commerce as well to make sure that that's also an outreach strategy on their own. But I just really want to thank your department for the hard work.
Thank you.
Thank you, Councilwoman. Chair recognizes Councilman Green.
Thank you, Council President. Good morning, Commissioner, and to your staff. It's a pleasure working with you on some of the issues that we've been working on this year. Couple things I want to follow up on, some questions that have already been raised. Regarding the questions that Councilman Jones was raising regarding short dumping, and we've been looking at some legislation in that regard. Can you give me a perspective, and I think you intimated this in your questioning, that just increasing the fines alone will not be a real deterrent for short dumping. It seems like it needs to be a combination working with our partners in law enforcement, police and district attorney's office as opposed to just increasing fines. Would you agree to that sentiment?
Yeah, I think that's absolutely correct. It doesn't matter what the fine is. The challenge is to find these people and get the evidence that we can have a case stick to their bad behavior.
So even if the fine was raised at a certain level and we were able to impact businesses by those fines being issued, you still think it's more of a more engaged both civil and criminal perspective? So if we increase fines up to $5,000, $10,000, and one or two examples, say there was a task force or a project short dump or something, and we're able to identify X number of entities that were short dumping, and that was following legislation that was introduced that increased fines to, say, a very significant amount. That alone, you don't think would be enough?
Yeah, I mean, increasing fines is a deterrent to some people. It's not a deterrent to others. And from my experience, the effort needs to go into doing an investigation to find out who's actually causing the short dumping and getting enough evidence together that we can have fines or other penalties actually stick. And, you know, and out of frustration, we a lot of times legislative body will increase fines thinking that that's the solution. But that only works for folks that are motivated to not do something because of a fine. You have other folks that are oblivious to that and will continue to short dump.
Okay. During the campaign, the mayor talked about possibly using, I think at that time, Philadelphia Parking Authority employees as like a cross, deputizing them to do L&I fines or violations to try to increase the number of basically people who can work as agents for L&I to do more code enforcement. Has there been any continuation regarding that conversation of how we can, because L&I is something that I think everyone in this body would say does not have the resources they need to enforce all of the matters under the code, but have there been any other conversation about how we can use other either city agencies or other agencies to help do additional code enforcement?
Yeah, that concept was first raised in conjunction with enforcing some of the sidewalk closures at construction sites, which is primarily the responsibility of the streets department. There hasn't been any recent discussions about delegating code enforcement activities to the parking authority specifically for L&I infractions.
The council president created a special committee on regulatory reform and review and looking at various pieces of legislation in our code as well as various department regulations. And I'm curious from the L&I perspective, do you have a process where you engage with business owners on a regular basis about issues and concerns they have regarding regulations outside of the traditional enforcement or interpretation perspective, where you work with businesses who may give you all suggestions or concerns or ideas regarding current regulations and get some input? Is there any type of communications mechanism to do that?
Yeah, we do. We reach out to the Building Industry Association, General Building Contractors Association, most recently with the American Institute of Architects, various business groups. We work together with the Commerce Department to engage with CDCs and local business organizations. We welcome the input of the public in helping us do our job, and in a relationship in which we can get information out so that they can understand the city's rules and regulation, and in turn give us feedback and ideas on how to make our operation more effective. So we're there and certainly welcome interaction with any and all stakeholders that are impacted by our activities.
Okay. Thank you, Council President.
Thank you, Councilman. Chair recognizes Councilman Don.
Thank you, Council President. A few more technical questions. You can give me quick answers so we can get through this, though. Part of the recent bill granting L&I to raise fees was to help expedite the plan review process but yet didn't appear there were any additional hires as plan review specialists. So how are these new fees expediting that process?
Yeah, we have coming up for this next fiscal year, we're going to be hiring 4 plan examiners out of the proceeds of the additional permit revenues that we're projecting.
Okay. Page 35 in the permits and licensing program. The program objective, which is great, this is great, you're increasing the amount of license payments online by 15%. By embracing technology, LNI is becoming more efficient. Do you think we can translate that into any type of labor savings?
Yeah, I think there's a tremendous capability in labor savings in our permit and license function. Not that we want to lay people off, in that we would be able to use those resources in other areas of the department that are shorthanded. We would like to do a lot more on the enforcement side. We would like to be able to provide more services to the development community in terms of helping them earlier in a project. And we don't have those resources now because they're all tied up in doing the day-to-day workload that comes in the front door. So yes, there is significant opportunity out there to create labor savings through technology.
And the other question I have is, I think it was page 9 of the budget in the administration's program. You budgeted for 3 new employees, but the Class 100 budget decreases by almost $99,000. So I was just wondering how we're hiring more people, which is great if we can do this, and have that Class 100 go down.
I'm going to pass this on to my ASD to answer.
Good morning, Councilman. That movement was the result of internal realignment due to transitioning to program-based budgeting. So some of the employees that were previously allocated under our administration division's codes, we transferred them more to the appropriate program that they work under. So that's the reason why that shows a decrease like that.
Okay. And I ask this of everybody. I just want to make sure you're aware of the city tells me the fringe benefit costs. Are you aware of the fringe benefit costs for LNI?
Somewhere, well, in terms of fringe, maybe around 80%.
It's about 80, in the 5-year plan, it's 87.7, going to 92%. I only want to bring it up because the fringe benefit with the city overhead of 37%, just be aware when you hire somebody for $50,000, it's 112. When you hire somebody for $100,000, it's 224. Let me go back to something that happened earlier this year. There was a problem, I think, getting use and occupancy tax compliance to go to settlements, and we had the system was down. And I guess might cause many problems for citizens of the city. So is there some sort of prevention we're putting in place to avoid that from happening again?
Yeah, that particular issue you're talking about is with the seller's certificates, which are presented at settlement to show what the legal occupancy of a building is and whether there's any outstanding code violations. The system did fail earlier this year. The issue was actually outside of LNI, but we're accountable to the public. We've created alternate processes to address the needs out there until the problem was fixed. The problem has been fixed. So anyone that needs a single-family real estate cert can now, again, do them online. We believe as we bring that system into Eclipse, that these various quirks that are happening out there will go away, because we're dealing with technology that's old and doesn't interface well, perhaps, with other computer systems that are out there. But we understand that that's a critical issue. The last thing we want to do is to slow down the real estate transaction. So we're actually moving the implementation of Eclipse-based real estate certifications. We're moving that up in the process so it's addressed sooner rather than later.
Another question, I want to go back to the prior questions on demolition that some of my colleagues brought up also. And that, you mentioned there was 4,000 properties waiting basically for demolition?
Well, there's 4,000 properties that have unsafe designations,
Right.
which means that there's a critical deterioration in one or more of the structural members of the property. Just because it's unsafe doesn't mean that it needs to be demolished right away. The ones that need to be demolished are the imminently dangerous ones. But what happens is, if the building owner doesn't step up and fix an unsafe, if he doesn't sell the property to someone who's going to be a responsible owner, eventually those unsafe buildings will deteriorate to the point where it becomes imminently dangerous, and then the department has to do the demolition.
Usually my experience is when we let maintenance go, exponentially, the problems become much greater, and they deteriorate a lot faster.
That's absolutely correct.
And so, but I want to go back to this question of the 15,000. I just want to get this one in. How many of the demolitions that we do where we expend the 15,000, how many of those, ballpark, percentage-wise, do we get the 15,000 back to the general fund?
Yeah, that's not a number that we track, because the money goes back to the general fund through the revenue department, and we don't have access to knowing how much of that.
So the revenue
money's
department would
coming.
have that information?
I would think they would have that, yes.
Okay, thank you very much. Thank you. Thank you, Council
Sure.
President.
Thank you, Councilman. Chair recognizes Councilman Jones.
Thank you again. So I realized that I used all my time asking a question. I'd like in this round, maybe you can respond and answer to some of the points I've made. Would you like me to repeat?
Yes, if you don't mind, Council, I'm sorry.
So the question about having a weekend crew and a after-hours crew to do inspections of both proposed illegal construction sites as well as stores that operate beyond hours. Is that something that is possible?
Yeah, absolutely. I would welcome to put together that type of operation.
Got one. Number two, can we put together a multi-level joint task force represented by LCB, Liquor Control Board, the Health Department, Revenue, yourselves, Fire, and Weights and Measures, to name a few?
I'm completely supportive of L&I's involvement in that activity, and we'll take a leadership role. I can't guarantee the participation of the other participants, but we'll be there and we'll push for that to happen.
So I'm pleased with the willingness to do that. I'd like to encourage my state partners, state reps and senators, to push for that from that level, so we can break down some of the silos and get some stuff done. Do you support cross-training for fire department personnel that might be in the building and see things that might not just be fire-related? Is that a possibility in the future?
Yeah, absolutely. I think that's a great idea. We should all have a basic understanding of each other's roles. You never know when you can get a critical referral that could be life-saving or otherwise be extremely important to the other department.
Finally, and now I'll do all the accolades. I really appreciate the professionals in your department, all of whom have done their best with the resources they have to make Philadelphia better. How are we doing with the broken window laws?
Yeah, I'm going to pass this off to Rebecca. She's been spearheading our broken windows and blight initiatives.
Good afternoon, Councilman.
Good afternoon.
Are you referring to the doors and windows ordinance?
I think Councilman DeChico might have pushed this. It's where a series of citations, if a building has broken windows, broken doors, you cite them, you give them ample enough time to remediate what's wrong, and then every 30 days, we go back out and cite them until we get it right. I know our fees sometimes don't always warrant people making corrective action, but our consistency at applying those fees makes the fines pile up to the point where they have to pay attention. And that's the general spirit of that law. Are you familiar?
Yes, so it is a specific program within the department. We cite them for that specific violation, which is having boarded or missing doors or windows. The fine can be up to $300 per day per opening. So if you're looking in the typical row house, it could be up to $1,500 a day. We use our typical inspection and enforcement timeline. So we inspect, we go out 35 days later, inspect again, repeat the process. Then we ask the law department to prosecute the owner if the owner has not stepped forward. We have always in the past attempted to focus on the owners where we believe there was an actual active owner, not wasting court time on someone who is deceased or who we cannot find at all. That program has worked very well. There was a specific court.
Can you quantify worked well? And I'm not, this is not a cross-examination, but help me to understand how it's helping.
So we brought in, when we did bring people into court, we had about a 75% compliance rate coming out of court, where the owners stepped forward. They were frightened of the very large fine because they saw the judge in court, giving people a $100,000 fine. That was really the benefit of having them all in court on the same day, because they could see how the judge treated people who did not comply. There was a lot of conditional fines attached, saying come back in 30 days and have made progress, whether you sold the building, whether you got permits, whether you actually put the windows in, or you'll face this fine. It's been a very effective program. Unfortunately, it is on hold at the moment due to the ordinance has been challenged in court as being unconstitutional. It is in front of the Pennsylvania Supreme Court at the moment. We are very optimistic, or the law department is very optimistic of the chances of the ordinance being upheld as constitutional. But it is still something that we are citing. We're citing those properties. We're citing those owners, bringing them into court for other violations. We're ensuring that the properties are not open to trespass.
Well, I thank you for that update. Finally, when we find neighbors who may be next door to a vacant property and the porch is falling down, the trajectory of the water is causing damage to their problems, or to their property, is there a way that we can remediate the problem and put a lien on the property and do that?
In some
I'm done, Mr. President.
in some circumstances, we can do what we call a site improvement, and one porch roof that's deteriorated is a good example. We can go in there, cut that separate from the existing porch on the next door neighbor, and perhaps put another post in to stabilize what the neighbor has and yet get rid of what the problem is.
And do you put a lien on the property that had the violation?
Absolutely.
Thank you, Mr. President.
Thank you, Councilman. Chair recognizes Councilman Down.
Thank you, Council President. I just want to go back to this demolition thing. I can't get this out of my head. I'll tell you why. I don't think it's right. I think if you have a budget, I think your budget says $9.9 million for demolition, and then fiscal year 17, you did about 550 properties. You're projecting 525 for 18. And if the city came back and said, we got 25% of the money back, that's $2 million that should go back into L&I. It should be like a revolving line of credit. It shouldn't be that you put out the 15 and then the city takes the money to the general fund. It should be used for more demolition so we can clean up this backlog. So I don't know who in the administration I can talk to, but I plan on talking to them, but I don't think that's right. I think the money should come back to L&I. Let me go to one other point. This is not a negative, this is a positive. Your performance, you have a performance challenges and initiatives chart, I guess page 6 of your testimony. And everything is in pretty good order. My only question to you is that on some of the reviews, how do we cut down the time for permits or building permits, et cetera? Because I know people in those businesses, time is money. How do we cut the time down from 14 days? If we said to you the challenge is to get it down to 7 days, and if on a building plan permit it's 20 days, can we get it down to 10 days? Are there ways or methods that you could cut the time period in half to make government more efficient?
Yeah, that's actually a great question. We can approach it from two different angles. The first angle is more staff, so that the workloads and the backlogs are reduced. And the second is to do a renewed effort to educate the design community as to what they need to submit the first time. A lot of times what we find is that the submissions are incomplete, they're missing information, they don't understand what the code implications are for a given building. We need to educate those folks. If they get a good submission in up front, that will cut down the time frame in getting the plans reviewed and the permit out the door.
Okay, and the other question I have is, it says here it's pretty amazing, the percent of residential plans reviewed and performed within 15 days is 99%?
Yeah, that's correct.
That's pretty good, that's good. And commercial plan reviews within 20 days are 97%.
That's also correct.
Have we looked at these performance levels compared to other cities to see how we match up?
I don't have a formal study that I can turn over to you, but we are well within the legal limits that were placed on all municipalities in the Commonwealth of Pennsylvania under the Uniform Construction Code. And we hear anecdotally that we're actually much more efficient and much quicker in doing our plan reviews than most other larger cities. But I would love to have a study to give you to prove that. I only have anecdotal information at this point.
So down the road, if you could come back to me at least, or in this body, with ways of cutting down the time and what you need in order to cut down the time, I'd like to see what that looks like so we can make L&I even more efficient than it is now, which is pretty efficient, but even do better.
Yeah, absolutely. The faster we can get plans out the door, permits issued, the quicker buildings get built, and we can build the tax base when we have workers move in. I mean, it's a win-win all around to improve the process.
But also,
we agree.
These kind of statistics should be reported because it may change people's impression of government, because we're actually doing your guys are doing a pretty good job here with your performance levels.
Yeah, we need to do some serious updating of our website, and as part of that, we would love to put our dashboards and performance measures right out there. We have nothing to hide. We want the public to see what we do. We want them to understand what we do, and we would welcome the opportunity to put those numbers up.
Okay, thank you. Keep up the good work, and thank you very much. Thank you, Council President.
Thank you.
Thank you, Councilman. I want to thank you all for your testimony today. I have a bunch of other questions I wanted to ask you, but we have other departments, so I'll see you next time. Thank you all.
Thank you, Council President.